live from Michigan City, Indiana. It's Long Arm TV Live.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Quilters Apothecary. Today I'm going to fulfill some requests that I had to do some applique type quilting. So a lot of times of course you're going to get quilts with a lot of applique, and I am actually working on this amazing piece by Brian Parton called Ascension, the Ascension of Christ, and it's absolutely amazing. It has a combination of silk and other type of fabrics. Mr. Ritchie, if you want to switch to this camera down here so they can get a view of it. So here, what you can see is we have silk, we have cottons, we have some specialty portraiture, which has been printed off. We also have some that has been custom drawn. We also have some overlay of tulle, which I think might be a little more of shimmering organza. So we've got some amazing stuff going on right here. So when I'm working on a piece like this, and I have a burgundy back on, I'm using an invisible thread to do my ditch work right now. I'm using Superior's monopoly. It is my favorite thus far of any type of ditching around or doing ditch work around applique or ditch work in general. I love the Superior monopoly. I am of course using I think I'm using a 18 needle on this, which is what I standardly use. In the bobbin, I have isocord embroidery thread. I have double bat. I have an 80-20 bat towards the backing, and then I have a wool up towards the top, and that's going to give it a beautiful faux trapunto type of effect. So let me, before we start, talk a little bit about ditching around applique. Now, a lot of people will use their finger to ditch around applique, which is fine until you get nailed by the machine, and then it's not fine. So typically what I use is my Mystical Mini. I'm right-handed, so I use the right-hand version. There's also a left-hand version, which means when you hold it in your right hand, the notch is up at the top rather than the bottom. So I tend to use this a lot. The other tool that I tend to use for around applique, and by the way, there are lots of different tools that you can use to do applique. These are just the tools that I've come up with to do around applique. But this one is our mystical square. It's our 4-inch, and it actually has the notches as well. I use this for a lot of ditch work when I have bad arthritis in my hand and I can't turn the ruler. But then also it has the notches for when I want to use that ruler around applique. Now, of course, obviously with the square, you can use that for right-handed folks because, of course, if you're right-handed, you're holding the ruler in your left hand. Dominant hand is typically on the handle of your machine. If you are right-handed, that means you hold the ruler in your left hand. And there are times with certain appliques when I'm right on top of it that I like to use that middle. It just keeps it a little bit more stable for me. So this one gives you more options, but this one was the original one that I came out with, which I love and use most of the time, unless I'm having a bad arthritis day. So now let's go ahead and get started. I've locked my stitches. And again, I have burgundy in my bobbin thread, and I have my monopoly on top. Um, and if I didn't say it before, I'm sorry, we have a rainy day, so my allergies are going a little nuts, so I'm a little out of it. Welcome, and I hope everybody out there is doing wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get started, and I have my machine set at 12 stitches per inch, which is what I like to do around ditch work. And then I have my start speed, which is my cruise speed. We're using the Innova today, so I have my start speed set at 50. And therefore, when I come and slow down, it's still going to be moving at about that pace. But typically, when I'm moving, that's a nice pace for me to be in when I'm ditching around applique. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Now, when I actually do this, what I want to do is um, I'm going to grab a hold of my handle, and when I am ditching around the applique like this, I grab a hold of my handle, I use this, and people think that you're moving the machine with this. You're not moving the machine. You're using your dominant hand to move the machine. What this is doing is it's simply wrapped around the foot, and it's keeping you in control as you come around the ditch. That way that's going to keep you right in that ditch. I'm not moving the machine now, and I have this ruler right up against that foot. I'm not pushing my foot out from the center. I'm not pushing that hard, but it's in there pretty firm. It's right up against the ruler foot. I know a lot of people say don't push real hard against the ruler foot. Well, then why have a ruler foot? I mean, I kind of assume that that's what a ruler foot is for. Um, and I'm going to come back now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to work through all of this ditching on this applique. So I'm going to come up. So this is going to be a bit of a tedious lesson. I'm going to keep that eye in there. Come right up, move my ruler away. Let me get a good visual. Just for the filming, I'm a bit away from it. So I'm going to come right on up in there. Follow that around. And again, that's going to keep me right in that ditch so that I'm not in the ditch, out of the ditch, in the ditch, out of the ditch. And that's what a ruler like this is going to be good for. Okay, so now I'm going to come around and down. I'm going to follow that ditch, and you can see this is about the speed that I work. Now again, for filming's sake, I'm a little bit away from the piece itself, and usually I'm right up on top of it. So I am moving a little bit slower than I normally would. And now I'm on a straightaway, so I might go ahead and use my straight portion just to kind of follow that ditch. I'm going to shift as I work around that ditch. Now I'm going to slide over, get back into the control mode there. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come down this line right here. So now I'm going to come down and keep me right in that ditch. Turn, come down, slide up, and again I'm going to slide into this part. Now this has this little bit of a flange right here. Of course, this is going to be the book. Brian did an amazing job on this piece. I've done 2 of his pieces so far, and I gotta tell you, they are exquisite. His workmanship is absolutely incredible. Now, as I come up to this little flange, I'm gonna flip that down. I'm actually simply just gonna go ahead and use my finger and take that right down there. I'm gonna keep that flange down and then go right there. And I'm gonna take that all the way over to the edge. So now I know that that's secure. I'm going to come back, and now I'm going to go ahead and head back up and around and continue with this whole piece. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my time, and just this section right here is probably going to take me about a half an hour, 45 minutes. Um, what I'd like to do is just to kind of have you focus on this. Now, what I did on the face, this is a solid face, is I went around the beard. I went in between the lips right here. Can you get a little tighter on that, Mr. Ritchie? Just a little bit. Wonderful. And then I went around the eyes. Now, because I'm using a double batting, there's not going to be any distortion here. So even though this cheek and this cheek is not quilted, I wouldn't want to do that. That's going to make him look like an old man, and that's not what we want. And I did little accents here with the invisible thread on his hair just to keep him perfectly stable. So now what we're going to do is you get the idea with this particular applique portion here. I'm just going to follow all of this applique, and let me do a little bit with this before we go to our next section. Once I get this done, then I want to take you over to the side and show you this amazing border. Is it possible to do the other side or no? Mm-hmm. So would it be possible to do this border over on this side rather than that side? I don't know if the cord will reach, but I'd like to be able to show them that right straight down on with the other camera when I go over there. This one. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a little bit. I'm going to give Rich just a minute to set that camera up to get a load of this border while I scoot over, get my tools in order. So now on this particular piece, what Brian did was he cut out, he has a border that he cut out, and then that beautiful Robert Kaufman fabric that I fell in love with years ago. He's taken that and he's fussy cut that all out and appliqued it onto the outer border. Now, obviously, I can't go in here and pick out absolutely every single piece of this applique. But what I can do is wait and have Mr. Ritchie set up this camera so I can get it pointed down here so you can get a better view. Okay, nice. Mr. Ritchie, I'm sorry, could you hand me the snips? I should have brought those with me, but I didn't. So now what I've done on this particular border is I started here and of course I basted the edge down. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ditch right down these little miniature beads that are here. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to this side and I'm going to go ahead and ditch down this side. And then what I've done, just to kind of keep this stable, because we're using invisible thread, we just want it stable so we don't get any distortion while the quilt is hanging. I'm going to go right down the center. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ditch down this ditch. And then what I did in this hexagon shape is I went ahead and I ditched the inside of the hexagon, and then I went out and I ditched the outside of the hexagon, and then right through the middle I just went from here right up to the top and just put a straight line to keep that stable. And then of course I went here and I'm going to ditch this over, do this square, and then come out and back here. And then I'm going to go ahead and come down and I'm going to ditch this portion right here. So that way that's going to pop out and be faux trapuntoed. And then of course, once I finish that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ditch here. And then I'm going to follow that down and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ditch this all the way up into here. Now I'm going to do that part throughout the whole quilt, and of course I'm going to ditch around here. I'm going to do that throughout the whole quilt, and then I'm going to roll it back, and as I roll it back, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come into this section, which doesn't have any ditch work in it, and I'm going to pick a spot. Probably I'll pick a spot here, and I'll simply ditch following some of that fabric around, and I'll keep that consistent on both sides. That way when this quilt is hanging, or it's folded and sent to a show, or it's folded for storage, or however it's going to be shipped or stored, it's not going to, once it's unfolded, have any distortion. Now, of course, the wool batting is going to help that as well. Wool is wonderful to be able to hide any creases or any issues like that. So that's what we're going to start with. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get started. Let me do my single stitch. Yeah, sorry about that. Thanks. We've got our studio a little bit disarranged today. Yep, that's perfect. Thank you. And then just pull this down and then pull away. Excuse my head if I'm in there. Okay, come down, single stitch or half stitch, pull up our bobbin, come back and fix that. Now I'm going to come right over here. And what I'm going to do is work my way from the outside in as I do this. I've got our ditch ruler. I already have the edge basted. Boy, I've got you running around today, Rich. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to line that up. I'm going to make sure that that's all as straight as it can possibly be. And I'm just going to follow that ditch straight down. Keep my reference point there. Come down all the way to the bottom. I'm going to take a few lock stitches. Pause. Take some slack into my thread. Single stitch. I'm going to come up. And now I'm going to line this up so it goes right through the dead center. Lock my stitches, and again I've got an invisible thread for that reason. Now I'm going to come all the way up here, line that up. This is a wonderful, intricate piece. And so this one definitely takes a little bit more tedious, slow quilting to get it to be right. Okay, now I'm going to lock those stitches. Got a little bit of ruler squeak. Whenever you hear that ruler squeak and you're getting that, what you need to know is it's the ruler rubbing against the side of the foot. It always depends on what the ruler foot is made of. And a lot of times what will happen is over time, when you're using your rulers through a quilt, what's going to happen is you're going to build up like a little bit of what I call carbon buildup on the side of the foot and on the side of the ruler. It's not the right word for it, but you get the point. And what will happen is you're going to get a little bit of ruler squeak, and that'll be the time that you're going to go ahead and wipe the edge of your ruler, and then you should be fine to go again. And sometimes if I'm having that really bad, if I'm using one of my older ruler feet on one of the machines, because I tend to use them until they wear out, what I'll do is I'll just take a little bit of oil on the edge of my finger and I'll rub it along the top edge of the ruler, and that will stop that. Now when I'm in my studio alone, it doesn't really bother me. I'm used to it. Grab that, got my bobbin, and I'm dragging thread because I'm going to go back and I'm going to trim that later. Okay. I'm going to come down, follow that ditch, and I'm going to tail. Where do I have my tail here? Let's get rid of that little guy. I know I've said that before, but I'm not over my work like I normally am. So come down. And what I'm going to do now is once I get down to the bottom, and bottom out my ditch, go down as far as I can, I'm going to head back up and follow that. Stay right in that ditch. And now I'm going to go to the inside, and I'm going to go ahead and ditch the inside of that hexie right there. I'm going to grab my square ditcher. Now you can see with my start speed at 50, it's only going to take a few stitches in the corner while I turn my ruler, which are nice locking stitches. And that's going to be a nice way to handle that. Now I'm going to go up, and I'm going to go ahead and ditch the outside of that hexagon. Okay, now I'm going to follow that ditch. Go to the center. I want to get right in the center there. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go right up through the center just to divide it in half, and that's going to stabilize that section. So what's going to show up here when this is all done is this beautiful fabric that Brian chose. And I'm not going to be then, of course, taking away from it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I could lock my stitches, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go up to here, and I'm going to go right up to the top of that to start with. Then I'm going to come back down, follow my ditch back up, and then I'm going to do some of the detailed ditching right here. So when we get up over here, I'll have Mr. Ritchie rearrange that camera for you a little bit. Okay, I'm going to line that up. Go right up through that center. And right up through the top of that fleur-de-lis design, the peak of that design. Follow that up to the top. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to slide in and I'm going to start doing this section and then this section right over here. And I think what I'm going to do is move my chair out. So I will do a little camera repositioning here. Wonderful. Okay. And again, I'm just following that curvature, and I'm going to wait just a second so he can switch the camera now that it's been readjusted. There we go. Can you take that in a little tighter? A little more? Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to follow that line. We get to the straight line. I'm going to switch to the ditch portion. Now I'm going to come up, and I'm going to follow that ditch right straight up that way. come down, over, and then follow that curvature. And that's when I like to use the notches. The notches are really good to follow a nice light curve. I'm going to bring that straight down. We come out. Now I'm going to come down the side and I'm going to do the ditch work around the straightaways. Oops. That's not something you want to do. Do you see that magic right there? Do you see that? My ruler went right up over my foot and it was just in enough where my, my needle didn't hit it. Live on camera. That would not have been fun. They would have taken my long arm away. Okay, come up. Okay, so now I'm going to follow that curvature. And what I'm going to do when I follow that curvature is I'm going to grab let's get him to move the camera a little bit. Or take it out, whichever works best. There we go. Excellent. Thank you, sir. So now this curvature right here, I'm just going to go ahead and grab my mini curve. And I'm simply going to shift that curve as I follow that around. Now I'll turn it around and that's going to keep me right in line with that curve. I could use the mini for this, but I like the angle of that curve. You know, you get used to, and I'm just going to follow that up. You get used to using oddball rulers sometimes based on your own hands and what works best for your hands to do certain things. So now I'm going to turn that out the opposite way because that curve is concave rather than convex. I'm going to follow that right around there. And now I'll go back to my ditch so I can finish that ditch. And this is obviously, like I said, this is very tedious, slow work that we're doing in a piece like this, but the payoff is going to be incredible. This is going to be one that Brian will treasure in his collection for the rest of his life. And then afterwards, hopefully, it'll end up in a museum somewhere, as it deserves. His work is just exquisite. If you haven't seen his work, check out his Facebook page. Again, his name is Brian Parton, and he has all sorts of these amazing pieces that he's done. Oops, turn it the other way. Come down, use my straightaway. And yes, I usually do end up with 4 or 5 different rulers sitting on my machine. Wait till you get that set up there. Get a closer shot of that. Now this particular piece is going to be done at the beginning of this week. I'm just going through and doing the fine tuning. A lot of it is already complete. So it's going to ship out sometime at the beginning of this week. I thought Monday, but I think probably a little later. Because I found a few places, you know, and that's going to happen when you're quilting. Like I said, I was going to leave this unquilted because of the double bat. But now what I realized is that I need to go in here and do a little bit of detail work around these beautiful spots so that it pops. Okay, so that's what I'll do as I work. And then on these white spots, once I ditch all of the figures, the different saints and the angels that surround the Christ figure, then we're going to go in and we're going to do some wonderful feather work, which I already have done on most of it, on the inside. And then we're also going to do in the Christ portion where he has the tool, I'm going to do radiating lines from the center out, um, which is something that he kind of asked for because of the piece that inspired him on this. So this is the tedious part. Again, tedious is a good word for this type of work when you're doing around applique or around specialty fabric like this. And remember, this is the type of work that you don't rush through. This is not, if you're stressed out or your blood pressure is high, this is not the day to work on something like this. This is stuff you work on when you're in a nice calm mood so that that way you can stay right in the lines and take your time and not rush through the process. And that little bit of extra time is going to take this up.
So what he's saying is days when I'm not in the shop.
That's exactly what I'm saying in the sweetest way possible. Okay, so take that down a little bit. So that is what we are working on today at the Tag Studio, the Quilters Apothecary. So it's a dingy, rainy day, and my head is doing the crazy throb thing. So sorry if I'm a little bit out of it and rushing Rich around if that was confusing for you folks. I hope that everything is going good where you're at and that you all are quarantining yourself and being safe. And we're going to do a few questions if there's any questions.
Okay. I got one question. What would you different if this was a raw edge applique and if you were going to sew down the edges of the raw edges on the long arm versus domestic machine? Suggestions?
Absolutely. So what I would do, repeat the last part of that question.
If you were going to sew down edges of the raw edges on the long arm versus domestic machine, suggestions.
Yes, absolutely. So, and actually I'm going to be doing a tutorial on that, what I do with that. I have a couple friends who use the steam to seam light and they'll do applique and then they don't sew down their edges and they have me do it. I'm not a fan of that type of work. I would rather they go ahead and do a nice little zigzag around it, but not all of our clients do that. So what I do is I use a thick line and I accent it and I go right into the inner edge. I don't go right to the edge of the ditch because then that's eventually going to peel up. I go right in like a, I want to, would you say a 16th of an inch, Rich, is what I've done on the giraffe. Yeah, I would say while I'm doing that, Rich, if you just want to reach behind you and take down the giraffe for me. What I do is I go right into that applique and I sketch. So as I'm ditching inside the applique, I'm doing a nice slow sketch with my ditch ruler, whether it be the applique ditcher or another type of ditcher. And Rich is going to bring a piece over that I've actually done that on, the giraffe that I did, because that one we actually ironed down without doing the applique because we were selling the pattern in our booth and we wanted to get it done. So if we could take it and let's put it caught. Yay, I'm getting pretty good at that catching thing. And then if you want to go ahead and fire up this camera. Okay. Okay. So can you see what we did here? And if you can zoom it out just a little bit, Mr. Ritchie, I'm sorry. There it is. It's going. A little more. Ta-da. So you can see right here, even though it looks like a design element, which is what I wanted it to do, what I actually was doing was I went into the applique, and when I did the ditch work around, I went inside, and so I did, like I said, about a 16th or a 32nd of an inch inside. And I just sketched back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that has kept this stable. This was one of the ones that were, thank God, saved from the Houston theft debacle. Um, and it's held up through God knows what it went through. But again, it's held up just fine. It's traveled thousands of miles. It's been folded up, wadded up, all of that. And as long as you, like I said, go in and do a thick line, that's how I would handle the applique that's raw edge. Now, if I would have gotten this and they wanted something, let's say Brian had not stitched down his applique as wonderfully as he did, and I'll just use this as an example. Let's use this foot because it's right there. Okay, so we see the foot. So if Brian had just ironed this down, I probably wouldn't have wanted to do that in here, right? Because that gold, it all depends. It depends on the piece. It's like, do I want gold around here? With the giraffe, it didn't really matter. But something like this, I might want to use like a skin tone or something. It's got to be something that you actually accentuate and want to accentuate with a thicker thread, if that made any sense. Okay.
Okay. Andrea W. asks, how do you make sure that the line stays straight when you're working down the edge?
So I'm assuming that you mean, for example, on here, the line stays straight. That's not my baby crying. That's something that I would say there. How do I make sure that the line stays straight? Well, Brian happens to be an exquisite piecer. So, but the one thing I will say is through all of the years, let me lock this and get that out of the way. Okay. But most of my piecers that I take in quilts, the line is not always straight, and I can't make a straight line out of a crooked line, right? So a lot of times with piecing, for example, if this line is off and it's a little crooked, I have to shift my ditch ruler. That does mean that the quilt is not straight. One of the things that can be a little controversial in quilting is I have a lot of quilters that will say, you always stretch things into square. I don't believe that. I used to do that for years, and what will happen is a quilt will bowl if it's not properly blocked, and a lot of people don't block their quilt. So if you're stretching a quilt into square so that you can get perfect straight ditch work, then what will happen is the first time you wash it, it's going to bowl and it won't hang right in a show, and that's gonna look like it's the quilter's fault. And I got to tell you, it is the quilter's fault because what they did is they stretched the quilt out of square, and fabric always wants to find its way back home. So typically, like I say, that's not, if it's a straight ditch, I'm going to do my best to stay in the ditch. But if that piecing is not perfectly straight, and I've yet to find anybody that's perfect at it, it's not going to be perfect. That's why as we're doing ditch work so often, we're going to be shifting that ruler just to keep that needle down in the ditch. So hopefully that answered that. But I do my best. Like if I get a really good, nice show quilt, and I think I showed that on the when I did the border for the Dahlia quilt, what I did is I used my channel lock, and I would manipulate the quilt so that the channel lock would be, the stitches were perfectly in the ditch. But that's on something like a show quilt. If it's a regular custom quilt for a client, that's not how that works. It's just, it is what it is, and you follow the ditch, and it's as straight as it can be.
Bev H. asked, do you generally use invisible thread for ditching? Will you use that on the whole quilt? And will you use maroon bobbin for ditching the whole quilt?
Yes, I will use the maroon bobbin for ditching the whole quilt. Um, and then I used white bobbin because I'm using white thread on the white parts of this quilt. Now you didn't see this, but this ascension, which I'm going to actually, Brian said I could take pictures of when it's done. It's actually the center. It's like a big medallion with the Christ figure in the center. The saints are surrounding it. Rich, is it possible for you to come here and let's see this here? Can we get a good shot of this? At least what's being shown on the camera, or on, yeah, on the frame. Okay, all right. So we have the Christ figure in the center, and as Rich kind of, and this is the absolute center of the quilt, this is uh, this beautiful shimmering organza appliqued over it with the other angels appliqued under and over. So they're holding this tool, sorry, they're holding that tool um, kind of under the Christ figure, and the Christ figure is, of course, the focal point here. Um, all of the applique is going to have burgundy bobbin. The radiating in this circle, I am going to locate the center of the circle and I'm going to chalk radiating lines going out because Brian wants radiating lines on the tool portion of the quilt that go out perfectly. Does that make sense? And then, now that'll be in burgundy as well. Now when I get out to here, move that. When I get out to this, what I've done is I have that wonderful feather filler that's in there. When I get out to here, I actually do switch to white thread in the back because I do not want to take the chance of having pokies on this quilt whatsoever. And you can kind of see it if I can lean that up. You can see kind of on the roller coming over where I've done that on the top portion, what I've completed so far. You can see the white thread where I put the filler in. And again, that's where you have to make some decisions. I just don't want to take the chance of having burgundy thread come through. And I will use white isocord um, in the filler portion. The only place I ever use invisible thread, I never do filler with invisible, is in ditch work. That's the only place because it's a strong thread, but it's not magical. And so I always feel that doing feathers and such, I like to use regular thread. And then when I only use the invisible for ditch work. So hopefully that answered that.
When oiling your rulers, could you use the wax that I bought from you? Probably
Yes,
the Wren wax.
that's a great idea. Yeah, duh. That's a great idea. I don't know why I haven't thought of that. And I know that's silly. Nope. Yep. Good job. That's a great idea
Oh,
because that's not going to leave a residue. And again, like I said, when I use the oil on the edge of my ruler here, I am not going all the way over like here. I am just putting the oil just on the upper half of the 1/4 inch thickness of the ruler. And that's after I clean it. Usually once I clean it real well. But you can kind of see here. You see how that's built up? A little bit of carbon from the foot. Now some ruler feet on some of the machines they use anodized. I know the A1s have an anodized foot, so you don't get that on the A1 quilting machines. But most of the other machines they use, what is it, Rich? It's chrome plated, and so you're going to get a little bit of a carbon buildup because it's just like almost a rail. But anodized will save that.
okay, Linda asked, will you show a photo of the quilt when you're finished?
Yes, I will. I'd be happy to, and I know Brian, like I said, gave me permission to do that, and it's amazing. It's going to blow you away if you think this is incredible. Wait till you see the whole thing. He's an exquisite appliquer and piecer.
Barbara Z asked, using monopoly smoke?
Yep, monopoly smoke is what I'm doing. The only time I use the clear monopoly invisible is if I were ditching in exclusive white areas. So if it were a log cabin that was pieced with all creams and whites, I might use the clear. I only use it like maybe 3% out of 100% of the time. Most of the time I'm using the smoke colored monopoly, because even in the pastel areas, for example, this face area up here, in this area, as light as it is, even around his eyes, even in this cream area, you're not going to see any of that invisible thread if I go off the ditch just a little bit. And that's why I love the smoke.
Veronica K asks, do you ditch the whole quilt at one time before dense quilting or just the throat area?
In this particular quilt, I'm actually doing it row by row. So I'm doing all my ditch work, and then I'm going in and I'm putting in the fill, because the fill is not micro. I chose not to do micro on this work because I wanted those feathers to be seen, just because of the art piece itself. Whereas normally I might have done really extra micro work in here. So I'm doing this one a little bit different. So because I'm not going tiny micro, um, I am doing all of this throat space, most of it, um, as I go. Now, that being said, if I were going to put really micro work in here and I weren't going to fill up this area on the way down, and I was going to go ahead and do all my ditch work all the way down and then come back, I would put a few basting stitches in all of these open areas, just a few, like one every inch or so, just to baste it and keep it stable so that that batting isn't going to be shifting and doing weird things on me on the way down.
Okay, Dina asks, please talk about the tension with invisible thread.
Sure. So, tension with invisible thread. I have to say, I'm pretty fortunate on the Innova machine, and as well as the Handy Quilter Amara and the Handy Quilter Forte. It's the same. So my tension, I don't change it at all. My tension stays pretty much the same, because normally I'm using 40 weight in the bobbin and the top when I do my regular quilting. And I find that when I switch to invisible thread on these two of my machines, these two brands of my machines, I really don't have to change it a lot. That being said, there are a couple machines, and I have one of my older Handy Quilter machines that actually I have to loosen the bobbin a little bit, loosen the bobbin tension, and um, and then I can loosen the top. Because remember, if I'm loosening my bobbin tension, that's making it easier for the top fragile invisible thread to go down and grab the bobbin thread and pull it up into the quilt sandwich. So I only have one out of, I think it's what, 8 or 9 of our machines that I actually have to loosen the tension. So you may have a machine that you might need to loosen the tension. The other thing is, if you have a machine that has a lot of intermittent tensioners, like some of the I think some of the older Gamels. I know my older Gamel had intermittent tensioner. I would, with invisible thread or metallic, I would have to skip the intermittent tensioner, just because that would put too much tension and I would get a lot of thread breakage. But once I did that, I never had any trouble. Plus, then I would loosen the bobbin a little bit. So again, I'm not sure what machine you have or what brand, but the key for invisible thread, if you are having a lot of breakage, is loosen that bobbin tension just a little bit. How much? Well, you have your bobbin case in your hand, and you can go check out our bobbin tutorial. And when I go ahead and lift up my thread, normally what I say is the bobbin case should flip up on its side but not leave your hand. Well, when you're dealing with something fragile like an invisible thread on a machine that has issue with it, then what you do is you want to loosen that bobbin tension, so when you grab the thread and pull up, and here's the speed, just like that. Start here. It's not fast, it's not slow, it's just pull. And when you do that, the bobbin case should only go up to about 45 degrees. So in other words, your bobbin tension is pretty loose. That's going to keep that loose enough for your invisible thread on a machine that's struggling with breaking thread, or with a lot of tensioners. Remember, every time we put a turn on a thread, I heard from someone years ago that it puts like 500 pounds of pressure, or whatever that is, on the thread every time you twist or turn the thread in a thread guide. Um, and that also might mean that on our machines, I don't have one on this machine, but do you know the triple hole? You know, where you go around and around and around? A lot of times, right. Um, no, not that one. No, I'm talking about the triple hole where it's a straight thing and you go around once, twice, three times. So Handy Quilters, A1s, I think Gamels. The Innova does not have that. Um, so what you do is you skip one of the holes. So I usually will go through the top and then around to the bottom. Okay. So that's how I typically will handle that. And I don't have any trouble. I have not run across a machine that I can't run invisible or metallic. You just got to play with it. You got to loosen your bobbin to get to the right tension, and you have to figure out, are there a few thread guides that you could kind of manipulate. And a lot of times on that triple one, two, three, if one and then the bottom one, skipping the middle one doesn't work, then what I did on one of my older A1s is I would go into the top and out the bottom one of those three rather than twisting it. And then I would find that I could run absolutely any thread that I wanted to, any fragile, because I used to run a lot of ribbon back then.
Dina also asked, she says, I get loops on the back.
Okay, so if you're getting loops on the back of your quilt, um, loops on the back of a quilt. Here are some of the reasons for loops on the back of a quilt. Um, Number one, your bobbin tension's too tight, and it's not able to pull the bobbin thread up into the quilt sandwich. And a lot of people think, well, I like a tight bobbin uh, tension. No, you don't. Nobody needs a tight bobbin tension. Like I said, go check out the tutorial. That's as tight as you want to get it. I don't care what your dealer says. They're wrong. You know, a lot of people say, bring that bobbin case up with you and you should do, that's ridiculousness. Not with the threads we're using these days. You want to have a nice 40 weight or 60 weight if you want to go 60 weight bobbin thread, and you want it just to come up on its side. Now, if you have it a little too tight, what'll happen is, and your top tension is not tight enough to pull it up into the sandwich, then what'll happen is you'll get pokies or loops on the bottom because it's not strong enough to pull it in. You could have a warped bobbin case. So if you're getting that pretty consistent, then your bobbin case might be warped. Get a de-warper. We have them on our site. You get an M size or an L size, and it just reams out that to clean up your bobbin case and make it like new again. Um, the other thing is maybe you're using pre-wound bobbins that the machine doesn't like. I mean, I don't know what you're using, or frankly, maybe you're using a thread that your machine doesn't like. This malarkey of every machine should run every thread. Salespeople say that. Quilters never say that. You know, my machine runs a lot of different threads, but it doesn't run every single thread. It doesn't like every thread. So you have to pick what your machine likes. But that to me sounds like an issue with tension. If it's consistent, if it's not consistent and you're just getting it every once in a while, um, then what I might say is the little finger that goes in to hold in where you snap in your bobbin case, that is your hook. Your hook is basket. It's the basket. So your hook assembly basket. What happens a lot of times is there's this little finger that goes in to hold that stable so that it doesn't turn and ruin your machine. And what will happen is a lot of people will have that finger in too far for certain threads, and threads will get caught. And so you'll notice intermittent loops on the back of your quilt. That'll happen sometimes. Also, what can happen is your quilt sandwich might be too tight. So those are some of the reasons that you can get loops on the back of your quilt. There's many other reasons, but that's where I would start right there.
And most people generally aren't going to want to try to adjust that finger themselves if it is too tight.
I don't know. I would.
Anyway,
So let's take a
it,
second and talk about that. Just give me a second.
all right.
So that finger that comes in there to hold that basket in, what I usually say to people is, and we probably need to do a little tutorial on this so everybody knows what I'm talking about. It holds your bobbin assembly case in, not your bobbin case, but your hook assembly basket in. And it's a little finger, all machines have it, that goes into a notch and it stays in there. What will happen sometimes is people will time their machine or something will happen and that thing gets push back in too far. And thread has to go around that little finger every time it makes a stitch. And if it's in too far, what's too far? Well, I usually say I only want mine in just enough so that my bobbin hook assembly does not spin. So I want it in maybe a quarter of the way inside that little area. And usually you'll see that thing when you remove your where's the thing that it goes in? Oh, right here. So am I? Nope, I'm good. So okay, on this, tell me if I'm getting it right, Rich. Okay, on this, let me go to the other guy. Am I there? Okay. And let me get my glasses on. Sorry, everybody. This is a hook assembly. This is what your bobbin case snaps into. Now, do you see this? You see that right there? That's where that finger goes into. It goes right into there so that that way the inside of your hook assembly does not spin. And that little guy, so let me get my scissors here. I know this is more information than you want, but you need to know how this works, I think. Let me see, am I there, Rich? Okay. So that little finger goes right into here, and what'll happen is sometimes it's in too far. Every time you take a stitch, the thread has to go around this, that little finger that's in. And if it's in too far, it gets caught on there and it can cause birds' nests inconsistently. It can get caught and cause loops. And so when I put my little guy in, I just want it in enough so it's just inside here, only about a quarter of the way, so that that way my hook basket's not going to spin and I'm going to screw up my machine and need a new hook assembly. So that's what I'm talking about with that. So, but that does happen on occasion. I mean, I've seen it. I can hit
One
a ruler and throw that off.
one last question,
Yep.
and this is from Robin L. What color would you use in the bobbin? Does it really matter?
What color do I use in the bobbin? Does it really matter? Um, Here's when it matters. It matters to me if somebody says, I want you to do my quilt and I only want you to use a single batting like a 100% cotton or an 80/20. Because for me, if it's a really dark back and then I'm doing filler in white on top and they want me to use dark thread all over the back, I don't have enough batting to hide pokies. So I'm going to get pokies just because that's the nature of the beast. So if I'm going to use a different color bobbin top and bottom, then I'm going to double bat, or I'm going to use a thicker bat like a wool or poly down. Dream puff would be another option. Anything that's a thicker batting, but I like to double bat. I just love the feel. The quilt hangs perfectly straight. So that's when using a different color bobbin works fine, like I am on this quilt. But there are times when I just don't want to take the chance, so I am using white in the white areas here because this is such a high-end piece. I want to make sure that Brian has no pokies when this is hanging on display. Okay, everybody. Well, there we go. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for being patient with me today. Sorry, I'm a little out of it. Um, as usual, know you're loved. Be safe out there. I hope that everybody's holding up okay, not getting too crotchety or cranky. Um, and if you have rain, I hope your sinuses are better than mine and your allergies. So be at peace, know you're loved, and we will see you down the road. We have a few fresh tutorials coming today, and next week, let me remind everybody, I was going to do it this week and I switched gears because I had to get this quilt done because Brian has been patient with me and I have dropped the ball on him so much with this quilt. He's been so sweet about me being so late with it. So next week I'm doing a specialty border treatment. We're going to do something totally different. It's actually going to be a full tutorial with the actual video pre-filmed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be up in the upper screen walking you through exactly how to do it so that it's a little more clear rather than having cameras move around. So I hope to see you next Saturday at 3. Is that when we're going to do this? Yep, next Saturday at 3. And have a wonderful week and be safe and do what you can to support each other. And we'll see you down the road.